TMZ is reporting wrestling legend Hulk Hogan has died at 71 years old. Correspondent Jeff Paul is live with more on this, Jeff.
On July 24th, 2025, the thunder that once shook arenas fell silent. Hulk Hogan, born Terry Gene Bollea, passed away at the age of 71, leaving behind not just fans, but an entire generation of believers, Hulkamaniacs, now mourning the fall of their immortal hero. For millions, Hulk Hogan was the embodiment of indestructibility. The 24-inch pythons, the torn shirt, the iconic leg drop. He preached the gospel of vitamins and prayers, and the world believed him. But behind the bravado, behind the carefully curated image, Terry Bollea was quietly at war with his own body. The man who once slammed giants was slowly being dismantled by time, injury, and relentless wear. Over the course of his life, Hulk Hogan underwent over 25 surgeries, knee replacements, hip replacements, countless back operations. One doctor once said his spine looked like a crushed soda can held together by screws, rods, and hope. In one of his final interviews, Hogan didn't hide behind tough talk. "I'm in pain every day," he confessed. Not just discomfort. Pain that woke him at night, that made walking feel like a match he was losing every morning. His legs, once pillars of strength, became his greatest burden. In early 2025, rumors swirled of mobility issues, whispers of wheelchairs and assisted walking. He laughed it off publicly, flexed for the cameras, but those closest to him saw the toll. Behind closed doors, he wasn't training. He was just trying to stay upright. Years of slams, decades of falling flat on his back for the crowd's entertainment, left his body hollowed out. His last real match was long ago, but the ring never stopped taking from him. And yet, Hulk never let the pain define him. He still showed up, still smiled for fans, still carried the burden of being Hulk Hogan, even when Terry Bollea was crumbling underneath. What fans saw was the legend. What he lived was the aftermath. In the final year of his life, Hogan quietly underwent what would be his last spinal surgery. It was supposed to help. It didn't. Complications followed. His balance worsened. His heart, already strained by decades of extreme stress, began to falter. And still, he showed up. He posed for pictures. He signed autographs. He filmed podcast interviews where he joked about being held together by duct tape and prayers. That was Terry. That was Hulk. But the truth is, the strongest man in wrestling had been hurting for a very long time, and no amount of flexing could stop what was coming. In the next chapter, we'll go further back into the childhood of a boy named Terry Bollea, a quiet, awkward kid from Tampa who would one day become the most famous wrestler in history, and learn that even legends bleed. Terry Eugene Bollea was born on August 11, 1953, in Augusta, Georgia. But his story didn't start with lights and cameras. It started with silence. His family moved to Tampa, Florida, when he was still a toddler, seeking a better life. What they found instead was struggle. His father, Peter Bollea, was a construction foreman, stoic, distant, and always working. His mother, Ruth, was a homemaker with a sharp tongue and little patience. They weren't cruel. They were exhausted. Like many working-class families in the 50s, survival left little room for softness. Terry grew up a shy, overweight boy. While other kids chased balls or played in Little League, he buried himself in comic books and old wrestling broadcasts on grainy black-and-white TVs. He wasn't the hero. He was the watcher, the dreamer, the one who sat in the back of the classroom, doodling wrestlers in his notebook while the teacher called him lazy. He didn't fit in. Not at school, not in his own skin. Bullied for his weight, mocked for his awkwardness, Terry learned early that silence was safer than speaking, that when fists fly, It's better to duck than fight back. But one thing changed everything. Wrestling. He saw it not as violence, but as theater, ritual, glory. The squared circle became his religion. Heroes like Dusty Rhodes and superstar Billy Graham weren't just entertainers. They were gods. Terry didn't want to be liked. He wanted to be larger than life. At home, he started lifting weights in the garage. By 16, his body began to transform. The fat melted. Muscle replaced shame. His classmates didn't know what to make of him. The kid they once mocked now walked like he carried thunder in his chest. But something was still missing. Identity. Strength gave him armor but not purpose. He tried college, dropped out, tried music, formed a rock band. It paid in beer and bruised dreams. Then one night, while playing a gig at a small club, fate walked in wearing cowboy boots. Wrestler Jack Briscoe, a legend in the Florida wrestling scene, saw him. Not the music, the size, the aura, the potential. He made one call to promoter Hiro Matsuda, and just like that, Terry Bollea was pulled into the orbit of professional wrestling. What happened next was brutal. Matsuda didn't train wrestlers. He forged warriors. In the very first session, he broke Terry's leg, on purpose. A test, a lesson. Most would have quit, but Terry came back, limping, in pain, determined. That moment, bloody, bruised, crawling, was the birth of something new. Not just strength, not just muscle, but myth. The kid who once got laughed at for being fat and slow would return as something else entirely, something the world had never seen. Next came the name, not Bollea, not Terry, but Hulk Hogan. By the late 1970s, the world had started to notice the giant with the golden mustache. Terry Bollea had grown into something that didn't look real. At 6'7", over 300 pounds, with arms like tree trunks and charisma you couldn't bottle, promoters saw dollar signs. But Terry didn't just want a job in wrestling, he wanted to own the ring. It was Vince McMahon Sr., the old-school boss of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, who gave him his first big push and his first big transformation. "You look like the Hulk," someone said. And it stuck. Terry Bollea became Hulk Hogan, and wrestling would never be the same. But it wasn't until he jumped ship to New Japan Pro Wrestling and later returned to Vince McMahon Jr.'s newly rebranded WWF that the legend truly began. Vince had a vision, to take wrestling out of smoky halls and make it a pop culture spectacle. Hogan wasn't just a piece of that puzzle. He was the puzzle. Then came January 23, 1984. The night everything changed. Madison Square Garden. 15,000 fans screaming. Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. The bell rang, the building shook, and in one iconic moment, Hogan broke free from the camel clutch, slammed Sheik, and covered him for the 3 count. The arena erupted. The Hulkamania era was born. And what followed was unlike anything sports entertainment had ever seen. Kids wore the red and yellow like armor. Adults chanted Hulkamania in bars. He was in action figures, lunchboxes, comic books, even Saturday morning cartoons. He told us to say our prayers, eat our vitamins, and believe in ourselves. But this wasn't just marketing. This was mythology. Hogan didn't play a character, he became an idea. The first WrestleMania in 1985 made him a household name. The third, in 1987, sealed his place in history. 93,173 fans packed the Pontiac Silverdome to watch him body slam Andre the Giant, a moment so colossal it still plays in highlight reels like a biblical parable. But behind the roars, there were cracks. Hogan wasn't just performing in the ring, he was working around the clock. Morning interviews, afternoon shoots, evening matches, midnight flights. Fame hit like a steel chair, and the man behind the myth barely had time to breathe. Still, he pressed forward. Still, he said, "What you gonna do, brother?" With fire in his voice, even when his body ached and his soul begged for silence. Because Hulk Hogan didn't belong to himself anymore. He belonged to us, the fans, and he carried that weight like it was his cross to bear. But what happens when the brightest star begins to dim? When fame becomes a cage, and the crowd's roar drowns out your own thoughts. In the next chapter, we'll follow Hogan into the 90s, into the storm of fame, fortune, and fractures, and the personal cost of being a living god. By the early 1990s, Hulk Hogan wasn't just a wrestler, he was an empire. A one-man phenomenon. The red and yellow, the bandana, the booming voice, all of it had become American folklore. From cereal boxes to movies like Suburban Commando and Mr. Nanny, Hogan wasn't just slamming opponents anymore. He was cashing in on cultural immortality. The money was staggering. So was the pressure. Everywhere he went, he had to be Hulk Hogan. There was no off switch, no Terry Bollea, just the icon. Always posing, always smiling, always strong. But inside, cracks were forming. He was a husband, a father, but fame doesn't leave room for quiet dinners or school plays. His marriage to Linda Hogan began to strain under the weight of it all. Behind the gated mansion and luxury cars, the family was quietly breaking. Then came the steroids. The WWF was under federal investigation. Wrestling's dirty secret, that its stars relied on performance enhancers to survive the brutal schedule, exploded in the public eye. And Hogan, once seen as the squeaky clean superhero, was forced under oath to admit he had used them. Fans felt betrayed. The mask slipped. The man who told millions of kids to say their prayers now stood in courtrooms and tabloids. Suddenly, Hulk Hogan was no longer untouchable. He was vulnerable, human, flawed. But even as the headlines darkened, the ring still called him home. In 1996, Hogan did something unthinkable. He turned heel, joined the NWO. The red and yellow was tossed aside for black and white. Hollywood. Hogan was born, cocky, cruel, brilliant. He wasn't a hero anymore. He was the villain. And it worked. The crowd booed, but they couldn't look away. He reinvented himself not to please fans, but to survive them. But what the audience didn't know was this. Every match, every slam, every moment on the mic was becoming harder. His knees were wrecked, his spine degenerating. The price of the performance was compounding. And Hogan was running out of credit. Worse still, his personal life began to publicly unravel. A reality show, Hogan Knows Best, pulled back the curtain. And what the world saw wasn't strength. It was dysfunction, family fights, scandals, a messy divorce. By the time the 2000s arrived, the Hulkster was limping more than flexing. He still smiled for cameras, still spoke with thunder, but the man who once felt 10 feet tall now lived in a body that betrayed him with every step. Fame gave him everything. Then it began to take it all back. In the next chapter, we'll watch as the icon falls even harder. Not in the ring, but in the court of public opinion. We'll see scandal, shame, and a silence so loud it nearly drowned him, until he found a way to rise again. By the late 2000s, Hulk Hogan's world was coming apart at the seams, and this time, no scripted comeback could save him. The man who once body-slammed giants now found himself crushed by something far more relentless: the real world. His reality TV show, Hogan Knows Best, had started with promise, an inside look at America's favorite muscle-bound dad. But it slowly turned into something darker. Cracks in the marriage, tension with his children, and an overwhelming sense that the Hulkster was no longer in control of the story. Then came 2007, A tragic car crash involving his son, Nick Hogan, left a young man named John Graziano permanently disabled. The incident shattered Hogan's public image. While Nick faced legal consequences, Terry faced something worse: the mirror, the guilt, the questions, and the feeling that somehow the life he built was imploding and taking innocent people with it. Shortly after, his marriage to Linda collapsed in a flurry of accusations, infidelity rumors, and bitter court battles. The man who once told fans to believe in yourself now seemed broken, his life broadcast in headlines drenched in scandal. Then came the tape. In 2012, a private video leaked, along with an audio recording that shook the world. In it, Hogan was heard using racial slurs in a moment of unfiltered anger. The fallout was immediate and brutal. WWE cut ties. Merchandise vanished from stores. His name was scrubbed from the Hall of Fame. Sponsors pulled support. Fans turned their backs. For the first time in 4 decades, Hulk Hogan didn't just lose a match. He lost everything. And yet, it wasn't the public shaming that hurt him most. It was the silence that followed. The silence of irrelevance. The silence of no calls, no bookings, no roar from the crowd. In interviews years later, Hogan would admit, "I hit rock bottom. I didn't think I was coming back from this one." He retreated from the spotlight. For once, he wasn't flexing in the mirror. He was facing the man behind the myth, and what he saw was a man full of regret. A man who had coasted on fame so long he forgot who he was without it. But even in that pit of isolation, something stirred. A desire not to be worshipped again, but to be better. He apologized publicly, again and again. Privately, he reached out to those he had hurt. Some forgave, others didn't. But Hogan didn't beg to be let back in. He focused on learning, on repairing, on surviving. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about wrestling anymore. It was about redemption. For most, the fall would have been the end. The scandals, the lawsuits, the silence. Enough to bury a legacy? But Hulk Hogan didn't stay down. Not because of ego, not because of fame, but because, for the first time in decades, Terry Bollea was ready to face life without the mask. Redemption didn't come with cheers. It came with small, quiet steps. He distanced himself from the spotlight and focused inward. Wrestling was no longer his stage. Humility was. He began speaking candidly in interviews, not as Hulk Hogan, but as a man broken by his own mistakes. No catchphrases, no persona, just raw honesty. "I let people down," he admitted. "I had to learn how to be human again." And slowly, the world began to listen. In 2018, after years of absence, WWE reinstated Hogan into the Hall of Fame. A move that sparked controversy, but also opened the door for a conversation about forgiveness, growth, and accountability. Hogan didn't strut back. He walked in carefully, knowing some wounds take longer to heal than others. Backstage, some superstars embraced him. Others kept their distance. But Hogan didn't demand affection. He offered respect, and for once, he listened more than he spoke. Away from the ring, he rebuilt the pieces of his personal life. He married Jennifer McDaniel, finding companionship not in spotlight, but in stillness. He reconnected with his children, mending fences scarred by years of fame and friction. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And though his body had long betrayed him, after countless surgeries, implants, rods, and screws holding him together, Hogan still showed up for fans. He attended conventions, took photos, shared stories not of glory, but of struggle. And fans, surprisingly, loved him more for it. Because beneath the muscles, they saw what they'd always hoped to see: a man trying. He began mentoring younger wrestlers, not with bravado, but with humility, reminding them not just how to play the game, but how to survive it. "Don't make the same mistakes I made," he'd say. "It costs too much." His legacy slowly began to soften, not in denial of the past, but because of it. Hogan wasn't just the guy who brought wrestling to Hollywood. He was the man who fell hard and got back up with no audience watching. In these years, Terry Bollea reclaimed something Hulk Hogan never could: his soul. And even as his steps slowed, his hands trembled, and pain became a daily visitor, he wore his scars like scripture, not for pity, but as proof. By the early 2000s and 20s, the man once defined by motion, the slams, the poses, the iconic run to the ring, was moving slower, much slower. Hulk Hogan's final match had happened years earlier, but fans didn't know it at the time. There was no retirement tour, no stadium farewell, just stillness. His knees were gone, his spine fused and fractured. His days began with painkillers and ended in ice packs. Even walking across the room had become a kind of match, and every step a victory. He spoke about it publicly, casually, but with gravity. "I'm not who I used to be, brother, but I'm still here. That's gotta count for something." Doctors warned him, one wrong move, one bad fall, and he might not get back up. For a man who spent his life bouncing off ropes and landing flat on his back for millions, that wasn't just a warning, it was a sentence. And so, Hogan did the unthinkable. He stepped away. Quietly, no lights, no pyro, no grand farewell. Just a decision, a private one, that the ring no longer needed him, that the Hulkster had given all he had. But even in retreat, the fans never stopped coming. They still showed up at signings, still asked him to flex, still called him brother. And he still smiled, still did the pose, though now with tremors in his hands and braces on his knees. His last years weren't spent training, they were spent reflecting, healing what could be healed, accepting what couldn't. He spent time with his children, especially his daughter Brooke and son Nick. The same man who once missed their childhood milestones now made time for quiet conversations, slow walks, and forgiveness. He became a mentor, a symbol, a walking storybook of wrestling's golden age, not because of the fame, but because of the cost he paid to earn it. And even though the spotlight had moved on to new stars, new champions, the echo of Hogan's roar still rumbled through every arena. You could hear it in the chants, feel it in the nostalgia. What you gonna do when memories run wild on you? In one of his final podcast appearances, his voice softer but still proud, Hogan said, "My last match? It wasn't in the ring. It was waking up every day and choosing not to give up." That was the real final bout. Not scripted, not choreographed, just raw, real, human resilience. In the final stretch of his life, Terry Bollea, no longer Hulk Hogan, just Terry, wasn't surrounded by ring ropes or cameras. He was surrounded by family, faith, and stillness. At his home in Clearwater, Florida, life had slowed to a careful rhythm. His body, after decades of abuse, had become fragile. He walked with support, often used a wheelchair. His voice, once booming, had softened to something more intimate. But those who saw him in his final months say one thing with certainty: he was at peace. His days were filled with routine and reflection, mornings spent on the patio with a Bible in hand, afternoons with visits from his children, especially Brooke and Nick, the kids who once lived under the shadow of Hulk Hogan, now coming to know the man beneath it. He wasn't the superhero anymore. He was something better, human, present, trying. Old friends visited when they could, former wrestlers, a few fans lucky enough to receive private invites. They didn't talk about matches. They talked about regret, forgiveness, love. Hogan spoke candidly about the pain he'd caused and the pride he still carried in the lives he touched. but the pain in his body was growing louder. The last surgery, meant to ease his spinal pressure, did the opposite. He became weaker. His balance faded. By mid-July, those closest to him noticed a change. He was quieter, tired, but never afraid. His final days were spent in that same home, tucked away from the roar of the world he once ruled. He didn't ask for cameras. He didn't record a farewell. Instead, he gave his family the one thing Hulk Hogan never could: time. On the morning of July 24, 2025, Terry Bollea suffered cardiac arrest at his Florida home. Paramedics were called. He was rushed to a hospital, but this time there would be no comeback. He was pronounced dead at 71 years old. His wife was by his side, his children nearby. There was no chaos, just a quiet surrender. WWE issued a statement within hours. The wrestling world froze. Legends posted tributes. Fans flooded timelines with memories, childhood photos, old VHS tapes, and one unshakable message: thank you, Hogan. Because despite everything, the controversy, the pain, the falls, he had left a mark. Not just in the ring, but in the hearts of millions who once believed in something bigger than themselves. Hulkamania wasn't just a marketing gimmick, it was a lifeline. And now, as we stand in the silence that follows, that lifeline becomes legacy. When Hulk Hogan took his final breath, it wasn't the end of a career. It was the closing chapter of a cultural myth, one built over 5 decades, countless arenas, and the hearts of millions of believers. Because Hulk Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was a movement, a memory, a symbol, the red and yellow, the bandana, the finger point, the 3 demandments: train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. To some it sounded cartoonish. To others, it was gospel. He inspired generations, kids who felt invisible, who didn't fit in, who found courage in a man who told them they could be strong too. Not with fists, but with belief. His moves were simple. His message was louder. What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you? That line was more than a catchphrase, it was an anthem for underdogs. And long after his legs gave out, the words still had power. Even his critics, and there were many, couldn't deny it. Hogan changed wrestling forever. He helped birth WrestleMania. He broke attendance records. He brought wrestling into mainstream culture when no one believed it could go there. He reinvented himself again and again, from babyface to heel, from megastar to mentor. He opened doors that thousands of wrestlers now walk through every day. And in the wake of his passing, that legacy is more visible than ever. WWE has announced a week-long tribute tour with special broadcasts replaying his greatest matches. Cities are planning memorial murals, fan vigils, and even a statue in Tampa, his hometown and the city where Terry Bollea once dreamed of being something more. Wrestlers from every generation, Cena, The Rock, Roman Reigns, even his old rivals like Ric Flair, have shared one unified truth: there will never be another Hulk Hogan. But the most powerful tribute? The silence in the crowd, the lump in the throat when his music plays, the tears when kids, now grown, whisper, "I remember watching him with my dad." The way his name makes people smile, even now. Because legends don't die in hospital beds. They don't die in headlines. They live in echoes, in memories, in every kid who ever tore off a t-shirt and struck a pose in front of the mirror. That's immortality. In his final years, Hogan often said, "I just want to be remembered as someone who gave people hope." He is. He will be. So wherever he is now, be it in some cosmic ring, flexing for angels, or walking without pain, know this: the immortal is finally at peace. And Hulkamania? It never left. It just lives on. In us. Rest easy, Hulk. You slammed giants. You carried generations. You lived loud. You finished strong. We heard you. We believed you. And we'll never forget you.